we're going to be taking a look at how the UVW map Gizmo, particularly in sub-object mode, can extend the UV manipulation options open to us. One good thing to keep in mind from the get-go then is the fact that when applying the UVW map modifier directly to a piece of geometry, the gizmo itself will scale to fit. And so if I go ahead and apply a UVW map modifier to the seat cushion, we can see that the planar mapping gizmo fits itself perfectly to the current alignment axis length and width dimensions. If I delete that modifier though, and then at element sub-object level in the edit poly modifier, scale the mesh down to around about a value of 80, come out of sub-object mode, and then once again apply a UVW map modifier to the top level, you see how the gizmo fits itself to the altered dimensions of the mesh. And of course this would be the same no matter what shape or size of geometry we applied the modifier to. Let's just hit undo a few times here to get our mesh and original UVW map back. One thing worth noting, however, is that this automatic sizing won't take place should we copy and paste a modifier onto a smaller or larger object. At that point, we would have to use the handy Fit button that can be found further down the options list. To take a look at the UVW map gizmo itself now, let's make sure that our cushion is selected and that the UV mapping type is set to box. If we want to clear our view of clutter, we can even use the Isolate Selection button just to focus in on our current mesh. Once done, we can expand the drop-down for the modifier itself in the stack area of the command panel, and then click the gizmo entry. What we can do now is engage any of the transformation tools that we have available and interactively control how the UVW coordinates are being mapped. For instance, with the Move tool engaged, I can click and drag on its ZY axis plane, and you can see, as I move the UV gizmo around, how this affects the overall mapping. Without letting go of the left mouse button, let's just right-click to cancel that operation. Now, even more noticeable are the changes applied when I use the Rotate tool, which actually helps us see just how the gizmo is projecting the texture onto the surface. As I rotate the gizmo, the popping we see is the geometry changing which projection plane from the gizmo is actually being used to map the face closest to it. Again, let's just right-click to cancel. Now we can also, of course, scale the gizmo if we wanted, although to be honest, it could be considered a good practice to avoid doing so, given that 1. We do have the size spinners in the UVW map controls to do that, and 2. You will notice as I scale that those same numeric values aren't being updated by the scale operation, meaning by the time we finish scaling, the geometry size being reported by the modifier will actually be completely inaccurate. Now the UVW gizmo, when using the cylindrical mapping option, gives us some important viewport feedback that can help us make choices in connection with the mapping process. To demonstrate, after making sure that we are out of isolate mode and out of the gizmo subobject mode on the cushion's modifier, let's select one of our cylindrical arm supports, and after applying a UVW map modifier, switch the mapping type over to cylindrical. Let's set the alignment axis to Y, and then click the Fit button. Let's now isolate our new selection once again, and if we then use the middle mouse wheel to truck and focus in our mesh, maybe rotating the view as well, we can jump into subobject mode, where looking closely at the gizmo, we see a single green line showing up whilst the rest of the UVW gizmo shows as yellow. Now this line is the UV seam that will be used to unwrap the mesh and that essentially defines the start and end points for the placement of the 2D bitmap that we are using. Now you can see, based off the colours we set up in the test map, that the texture clearly starts and ends at the green line, this being a UV seam. Another piece of feedback that the UVW gizmo gives in the viewport is this small line that we currently see peeking out of the top of the cylinder. Now this denotes the up axis for the UV map, and so tells us where the top of the texture map should be. This again can be a critical piece of information in terms of accurate map placement, especially so if we are placing something like decals on an object, and so need to know the exact orientation of the UV coordinates in order to position, let's say, a label on a bottle correctly. Knowing how to use the UVW Maps gizmo can help us make sure that this quick and dirty style of mapping can have a measure of control and quality applied to it.